I truly believed that success would change everything. That once I reached the place I had chased for so long, the doubts would quiet down, the emptiness would disappear, and life would finally feel complete. That's the promise success makes from a distance. You see the stage, the lights, the applause, and you assume peace comes with it. When I finally achieved what I had worked years for, it did feel unreal at first. The recognition, the validation, the feeling that all the sacrifices meant something. From the outside, it looked perfect. People congratulated me, celebrated me, and told me how lucky I was, and I believed them. I told myself this was it, this was the moment, everything made sense. But what nobody ever tells you is what happens after the noise fades, after the messages slow down, after the excitement settles. That's when a strange quiet creeps in. Not the kind of quiet that feels calm, but the kind that makes you aware of yourself in ways you weren't before. I remember sitting alone after one of my biggest moments, expecting to feel fulfilled, and instead feeling unsettled. Not sad, not disappointed, just confused. I had reached the destination, yet something inside me felt unfinished. Success has a way of changing the air around you. People start seeing you differently, speaking to you differently, expecting different things from you. Conversations become shorter, more careful. Fewer people ask how you're really doing because they assume you're doing great. After all, you made it. And slowly, without realizing it, you start carrying that assumption too. You smile more. You reassure others. You hide the parts that don't match the image of success. That was the moment I began to feel something I never expected to feel at the top. Loneliness. Not because I was alone, but because I felt misunderstood. Because the version of me people celebrated wasn't the same version that still had questions, doubts, and quiet fears. And the hardest part was feeling guilty for feeling this way at all. Telling myself I should be grateful, strong, satisfied. But no matter how much I tried to silence it, that loneliness stayed, and that's when I realized something important. Success doesn't end uncertainty. Sometimes it's where a deeper kind of uncertainty begins. As that feeling settled in, I started noticing how differently the days felt compared to before. When I was chasing success, every day had a clear purpose. There was always a next goal, a next milestone, something pulling me forward. But now that I had arrived, the direction felt less obvious. I still trained, still competed, still showed up every day, but the motivation felt different, quieter, more internal. And without that constant chase, my thoughts had more room to wander. I began questioning things I had never questioned before. Who am I without the struggle? What drives me when the dream is no longer in the future, but the present? The loneliness showed up most clearly in the small moments. After long days when there was nothing left to distract me, when I wasn't surrounded by people congratulating me or talking about what came next. Those moments felt heavier than I expected. I would replay conversations in my head, wondering if people still saw me the same way, or if success had quietly created distance. Not distance because of jealousy or resentment, but distance because people assume you no longer need the same support. You're expected to have it figured out. You're expected to be confident, grateful, fulfilled, and that expectation can feel isolating when you don't fully recognize yourself in it. I noticed how often I stopped sharing certain thoughts out loud, not because anyone told me not to, but because I didn't want to disappoint anyone who believed success had solved everything for me. There's a pressure to live up to the image people have of you once you achieve something big. You become careful with your honesty. You filter your emotions. You learn to present strength even on days when you don't feel it. And over time, that separation between who you are and who you're expected to be grows wider. That was when I understood that loneliness after success isn't about being alone. It's about feeling unseen. It's about realizing that achievement can elevate your status without necessarily deepening your connection. And that realization doesn't hit all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, until you can no longer ignore it. That realization stayed with me longer than I expected. I started paying closer attention to how success subtly reshaped my relationships. People weren't doing anything wrong, but everything felt slightly different. Conversations became more surface level. Compliments replaced curiosity. Instead of being asked how I was feeling, I was told how proud everyone was of me. And while that support mattered, it also made it harder to be honest. Because once people believe you've made it, they assume you no longer struggle in ways they can relate to. They don't see the internal adjustment happening behind the scenes. They don't see the part where you're still learning who you are in this new space. I noticed that the more successful I became, the more careful I was with my words. I didn't want to sound ungrateful. I didn't want to seem like I was complaining about something so many people dreamed of. So I kept things light. I nodded. I smiled. I said I was doing great. And the more I did that, the more disconnected I felt from my own truth. Not because I was lying, but because I was leaving parts of myself unspoken. Over time, that silence started to feel heavy. What surprised me most was how success magnified self-comparison. I started looking at others who had achieved similar things and wondering why they seemed so at ease, why their confidence looked effortless while mine felt fragile. I questioned whether I was doing something wrong, or if I was simply built differently. That comparison made the loneliness sharper because it convinced me I was alone in feeling this way. I told myself everyone else had adjusted better, faster, smoother, and that belief made me retreat inward even more. But the truth was, I wasn't behind. I was transitioning. And transitions are uncomfortable by nature. I just hadn't learned yet that success doesn't immediately give you stability. It removes the chase, but it replaces it with questions. Questions about identity, purpose, and what actually keeps you grounded when external validation fades. And those questions don't come with easy answers. They come with quiet moments, long nights, and the kind of loneliness that forces you to listen to yourself more closely than ever before. As those questions grew louder, I realized I couldn't keep avoiding them. Ignoring that loneliness wasn't making it go away, it was only making it heavier. So instead of distracting myself, I started sitting with it. I paid attention to when it showed up and what it was asking of me. It wasn't asking for attention or validation, it was asking for honesty. I saw that the discomfort always appeared in moments of stillness when there was no performance required, no expectations to meet. That's when I felt the gap between who I used to be and who I was becoming. And that gap was uncomfortable because it meant letting go of the identity that had been built entirely around the chase. I began to understand that success doesn't just give you new opportunities, it takes something away as well. It takes away the clarity of being on your way to something. When you're chasing a dream, everything feels purposeful. Every sacrifice feels justified. But once you arrive, you're left asking what drives you now. That question doesn't have a quick answer, and sitting with it can feel isolating because no one else can answer it for you. I also noticed how success quietly removes certain safety nets. When you're on the way up, people check in more. They encourage you. They remind you that it's okay to struggle. But once you've arrived, those reminders fade. Not because people stop caring, but because they assume you've outgrown the need for them. That assumption can make you feel like you have to carry everything on your own. And over time, that self-reliance turns into emotional distance, even from people who still support you. This was the moment I realized loneliness after success isn't a flaw, it's a signal. A signal that you're entering a phase where growth is internal, not external. Where the work is no longer about proving yourself, but about understanding yourself. And that kind of work doesn't happen in crowds. It happens in quiet, uncomfortable spaces where you're forced to face who you are without applause. Once I accepted that this loneliness wasn't something to escape, the way I experienced it began to change. It stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like a teacher. I realized how much of my identity had been tied to movement, to chasing the next goal, the next milestone. Without that constant forward pull, I was finally forced to slow down and listen to myself. And that was uncomfortable because it meant sitting with thoughts I had never given space before, but it was also clarifying. I started to notice which parts of my life actually grounded me and which parts only distracted me. Success had stripped away the noise and left me with something more honest. I began creating small routines that weren't about performance or achievement, quiet moments in the morning where I could think without pressure, time away from expectations, where I wasn't anyone's inspiration or example, just myself. Those moments didn't erase the loneliness, but they gave it context. They reminded me that being alone doesn't always mean being empty. Sometimes it means you're finally giving yourself room to exist without judgment. What surprised me most was how this internal shift slowly changed the way I showed up around others. I wasn't trying as hard to be impressive. I wasn't measuring my worth by reactions anymore. I started feeling more comfortable with silence, with pauses in conversation, with not having everything figured out. That comfort made me feel stronger in a quieter way, less dependent on validation, more rooted in who I was becoming. I also realized that success had given me access, but loneliness was giving me clarity. It was teaching me self-trust, teaching me that confidence doesn't come from applause. It comes from knowing you can sit with yourself and not feel the need to escape. That lesson didn't make the journey easier, but it made it more meaningful because I wasn't just learning how to succeed, I was learning how to live inside that success without losing myself in the process. As that clarity settled in, I started to understand something I had missed for a long time. Loneliness after success isn't punishment, it's transition. It's the space between who you were when you were chasing something and who you need to become to sustain it. That realization changed the way I treated myself. I stopped criticizing my emotions and started respecting them. I allowed myself to feel uncertain without labeling it as weakness. Because uncertainty, I learned, is often a sign that you're growing beyond old limits. I noticed how my confidence began to shift. It wasn't louder or more visible, but it was steadier. I wasn't relying on constant reassurance anymore. I trusted my preparation, my values, and my ability to adapt. Even when things felt quiet or unclear, I knew I could handle it. That trust didn't come from success itself. It came from surviving the emotional silence that followed it, from learning how to stay grounded when external validation wasn't filling the gaps anymore. I also began to see how this experience changed the way I connected with others. I was more patient, less reactive, more present. I didn't need every interaction to affirm me. I could simply be there without proving anything. That made my connections feel more genuine, even if they were fewer. And I realized something important. Depth often replaces quantity after success. You don't need as many voices around you. You need the right ones. The loneliness didn't disappear completely, but it softened. It became familiar. And instead of feeling like something was missing, I felt like something was being built, a stronger sense of self, a clearer understanding of what matters when the spotlight fades. I wasn't just learning how to succeed in public anymore. I was learning how to exist in private with honesty, patience, and self-respect. And that lesson was shaping me in ways no achievement ever could. Looking back now, I can see how necessary this phase was, even though I didn't understand it at the time. Loneliness after success wasn't a mistake in my journey. It was a requirement. It forced me to separate who I was from what I had achieved. It taught me that success can open doors, but it can't tell you who you are once you walk through them. That part is yours to figure out alone. And as uncomfortable as that sounds, it's also where real strength is built. Not the kind that shows up on highlight reels, but the kind that keeps you steady when nothing external is holding you up. I used to think loneliness meant I was missing something. Now I understand it meant I was becoming something. It meant I was shedding old versions of myself that were built only to chase, only to prove, only to arrive. And in that shedding, I made room for something quieter and more durable. Self-trust, purpose that didn't depend on applause, confidence that didn't disappear when the noise did. Success didn't give me peace the way I imagined it would, but loneliness taught me how to create it for myself. It showed me how to sit with uncertainty without rushing to escape it, how to value alignment over validation, how to understand that growth doesn't always feel like progress while it's happening. Sometimes it feels like standing still, asking questions no one else can answer for you. If you're watching this and you've reached a goal you once dreamed of, but now feel strangely disconnected, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not ungrateful. You're not broken, and you're not doing anything wrong. You're in the space where the external rewards stop carrying you and the internal work begins. That space can feel lonely, but it's also where clarity is formed, where identity deepens, where success stops defining you and you finally begin defining yourself. And if stories like this resonate with you, if you want more honest conversations about what happens after the dream comes true, stay here, subscribe. This journey doesn't end with success. In many ways, that's where it really begins.